So thank you, everyone. So welcome to our Humphrey Friday seminar at the University of Maryland. My name is Masimba Biriwasha. If you're watching us on Google Hangouts, I'm going to be talking a little bit about the land situation in Zimbabwe. And the title of my presentation is Land of Storm. I mean, as you can see from that picture, this is a typical scenery in Zimbabwe. If you go around the country of Zimbabwe, you see a lot of this, like stones sitting on top of each other. Basically, the name Zimbabwe comes from an ancient structure which is in the south of Zimbabwe, and that name means House of Stone. So that's where the title, that's where I got the flavor of the title from, Land of Stone. But it's significant because as you're driving around the country, you encounter these rocky outcrops wherever you go. The land situation in Zimbabwe has been very significant. And I suppose it's not just a Zimbabwean story. I think in every other part of the world, the land is a very critical issue. So one of the things that I was hoping we would do would just be to reflect on what the land means different countries. And I'm going to ask you to just write down in your own language what land means, and just your own personal reflection of what the land is all about in the country. So we'll just take like 1 minute to do that.
You want me to write in my native language?
Yeah, in your native language. What does land mean in Bengali? So if there's been conflict around land, you can also just make a point of that. And I'll collect these papers because, as you see in my next slide, one of the things that I'm trying to do, because the presentation that I'm giving is not definitive. One of the things that I'm trying to do is to really reflect on the land scenario in my own country, and also to start working on a book about the land. So I would very much be interested in hearing about what the land situation is in your country. Okay. So if you're watching us on Google Hangouts, I think the question is, what is land to you? What does it mean to you? You can just take it like 1 minute to write that down, and we'll get back to it. So what I have up there is a poem, or it's part of a song that the famous reggae musician Robert Nesta Marley sang for Zimbabwe, because one of the things that he did was to dedicate a song to Zimbabwe. And I'll play I'll play a YouTube video of that song later on in the presentation. So part of what he says is that set it up in Zimbabwe, every man has a right to decide his own destiny. And in this judgment, there is no partiality. So arms in arms with arms will fight this little struggle, because that's the only way to overcome our little trouble. And then he goes on to say, to divide and rule could only tear us apart, and that soon we'll find out who the real revolutionaries are. I'll come back to this point because I think it's very significant in describing some of the struggles that are going on in Zimbabwe today. So my objective today is to share the story of Zimbabwe's land reform from a history and personal viewpoint. So I'll try and go back into the history of Zimbabwe so that you get a proper perspective of where the land issue in Zimbabwe is coming from. And also, as I said earlier on, is to begin the process of refining ideas of a book on Zimbabwe's land-related issues. And I'm looking at a book that is really like about the stories of people, not just the political take of the land situation in that country. And also to have a conversation on why land continues to cause so much bloodshed in the world. Because the story of Zimbabwe is not very unique. If you think of it, even if you look at the history of this country where we are today, there's been a lot of bloodshed over land. If you look at Palestine, if you look at Israel, the struggle is over land. If you look at many, many countries around the world, the struggle is over land. So what I'm hoping we can do today is to start that conversation on why land continues to cause so much bloodshed. And just to reflect on that, one of the things that when I was preparing for this presentation was that like history is so bloody. Like if you start reflecting on history, you start realizing that there's a lot of blood that is spilled in many of our countries, in many of our countries' history, or in the world's history. And then the problem, though, is that blood spilling does not just stop when you're reflecting on history. That history in itself also gives back to blood. It gives justification to more killing. So you get more killing going on, you get more killing going on as a result of a history that was based on killing. And I think our greatest challenge going forward is how to reshape our societies, that have all this like bloody history, to make them more fairer and equal without, spilling blood again. So how can you resolve the Palestinian Israeli issue going forward without necessarily repeating the same act? And I think this was the very crux of the land issue in Zimbabwe, that how would you address a problem that was existing in this country, based in the history of that country, without making the same mistakes that led to that problem in the first place? So let me just go forward. So incidentally, today is the birthday of President Robert Mugabe, and as you can see, that's President Robert Mugabe there in the middle. This guy with blue tie. That's my president. I think he's in a stadium. I mean, it should be like a national holiday. So one of the problems with the land story in Zimbabwe is that it's been captured only in the character of Robert Mugabe. And a lot of why that problem exists in the first place has not been articulated enough. But just to point that over the past 14 years, Zimbabwe has made a lot of news headlines around the world as a result of this, especially as a result of this land reform program. And in Zimbabwe itself, the land reform program has resulted in political and socio-economic fallout, which continues up to today. And also economic fallout, which has a very negative impact on the lives and livelihoods of Zimbabwe. It is estimated that over the past 14 years, approximately 4 million Zimbabweans have just left the country, mainly to South Africa, to the United Kingdom, and the United States, New Zealand, and Australia. So Zimbabwe has lost a lot of its talent, but it's mainly a result of what happened around the land reform issue in year 2000. So moving on. So this is the map of Zimbabwe. So and it's like in Southern Africa. We share a border with South Africa, Mozambique, Botswana, and Zambia. And Zambia. So, and that's a map of Zimbabwe. It looks like a teapot view. So, but what I just wanted to show you with this map is the agroecological zone of Zimbabwe. We have about like five agricultural zones. So this part, the middle part, is the one that contains the most fertile land in Zimbabwe. The southern part is largely very dry. There's not a lot of farming that goes on in those areas, mainly like ranch farming, and then you've got national parks also, mainly like in the brown and the red part. So the green and the yellow part, that's where like most of the intensive commercial farming takes place. So I would say, like I said, part of what I want to do is share the story of my personal story of the land situation. And I'll confess that I didn't know that Zimbabwe had a land problem. So part of that reason is my father was one of the first generation of land farmers to buy a farm. Like 1982, we moved on to a farm in eastern part. And from that farm, the other farms that surrounded us with white homes. That didn't strike me as strange at that time. You know, just saying, okay, I was on paper and right, to one side, to the other side, to the other side. I mean, and then there was a sports club close by, about 2 farms away from us. But I remember that in that sports club, that like people were not allowed to go into that sports club. But I mean, like I was young. Really break stuff, what the reason was. And then my maternal grandfather, he was a master farmer. And I'll get into that. I'll tell you like what that master farming was. My maternal grandfather had a big farm. He had a big farm also in the eastern part of Zimbabwe, like somewhere in the dry area, the eastern part of the country. And it was a big farm. So when the issue of land started really coming up towards the 1990s, end of the 1990s, it struck me as strange because I thought, like, why would people fight over land when there was so much land? You know. But as you see, I think I was quite mistaken. And part of the reason is that not much of the land which was written in history in Zimbabwe. So what I want to try and do in front of this, I'm trying to be very, very objective about this. So I'll try to talk about before, when I'm saying that before the settlers, before the colonization of Zimbabwe, what was the land situation in the country? And then we'll talk a little bit about colonization, what happened to the land, and the liberation movement, the independence, the situation. And I promise you that it's not going to be a boring history lesson because I'm going to try and condense this into a few minutes. Okay, so let's go on. So I just thought I should just pull up this picture because this is one of the most like historic pictures out of the land, when the land conflict was happening in the early 1990s. And what you see there is those two guys. Like this guy has been a big component of the dispossession that happened in the White House. Then in the background, all the like the farm workers. So you see, like most of these farm workers were migrant workers coming from Malawi, and Zambia, and coming to work in Zimbabwe. They were very empowered, really animated, and like where I grew up. Again, I'll come back to that. Before, where I grew up, my most of my friends were children of farmers, like from surrounding areas. So I can understand their experience. And the first school that I went to was like 5 kilometers away from where we live. I used to go there with like children of farmers. And I mean, they were highly sort of like disempowered, and they were also victims of land. But anyway, let's talk about like what the situation was. So, Sister John Rhodes, I think most of you know the Rhodes Scholarship. It's named after Sister John Rhodes, who was the pioneer or who was the person behind the colonization. So the first sort of maybe not like they've been contacted in like especially the Portuguese. Like there was trade going on in the past in the Portuguese, with people of the Chinese, and some of the Arabians to come to trade in ivory and gold. But many of the stories are not real. But the first contact, in terms of like annexation of land, happened around 1890. That's when student roads engineered a group of they're called pioneers in South Africa. And basically, came into Zimbabwe with this group. But before that, the Shona people, who were who constitute the majority of people in Zimbabwe, they lived in this country for about 1,000 years. And then there's a group of people that come from South Africa, which is just one country shaped for they moved into the southern part of the country. So, Sister John Road is the big person. So he was a rich guy. I mean, like I know his story, even though he was called that off, he was quite pioneering. So basically, he managed to trick the king of the Ndebele people in the south that was going to give him like 1,000 rifles, and 10,000 rounds of ammunition and 3 for bombs. And then as a result, managed to finish the country. And then these settlers, they were promised 3,000 acres of farm and gold claims in return for getting into modern day. And then the Shona people were too pragmatic, they're like tribes that we talked about. They could not put up a real fight. So my question to you would be, like, where was this land, these farms, where do you think they were going to come from? What do you think was going to happen? Can you take a guess? Where, like, they were promised 1,000 acres of farmland. Like, where was it going to come from? Yeah. So that's correct. So this land was, but how, Anyway, like, so the settlers or the pioneers, they're called pioneers, short players, small people. The later slide to show you what I'm talking about. But essentially, they think the firepower, so they're going to fight these people who are like scared, like who did not put up enough of resistance. So this is what happened. So the settlers came, and then they got into the country. So the story goes that what some of the settlers would do is get on a horse and then just ride it from here, wherever the horse would stop, they would put a peg in one direction, and then ride the horse in one direction and put a peg, and then say that this is my land. And then the next step would be to clear out anything that was in that area, taking away the cattle from people. Like, so if I was living in that area, that someone had declared their own, if I had some cattle, they would be confiscated. So that's part of the story. And this is Sister John Road, digging out. Sister John Road, like, it's got a charismatic story. I mean, like I said, I don't think I really regret about it. I have the story. It was definitely impressive. The story is nice. So let's talk about like sort of the colonial period, and I'm really condensing the history. So 3 years after the pioneers arrived, so the pioneers were a group of mercenaries, essentially. Mercenaries, some from the US, some from wherever, like they were in South Africa because there was a gold rush in South Africa. Like this gold rush into South Africa attracted people from all over the world. So you can think of South Africa as like the United States, because South Africa attracted everyone from different parts of the world. So when Sujo said, let's go to Zimbabwe, because there was a feeling that the minerals in South Africa that the belt also stretches to Zimbabwe, which is true anyway. Like now they're saying they hold that diamond before. So you move with these guys, promising them heaven in Zimbabwe. And he had formed a commercial company, which was registered. It was called the British something company. And he managed to move into Zimbabwe. And so basically, within a year, they managed to take land in the southern part of the country, and then in Mashonaland, land, also things were starting to put in place, like taxing the people, and then they started like developing commercial land. So that land that had been taken away started being developed, and some lands were reserved for African occupation. And then, like, I mean, that's a long time in history, but I'm just trying to make it short. And then, but I'll just point out that in 1930, part of what was happening in Zimbabwe is like the land apportionment act, which basically barred African land ownership outside the reserves. Now, the reserves were places where African people were kept, or black people in Zimbabwe. That's where they were kept, and they were called reserves because they were like fenced areas. They were like, you know, like you put a, like these areas where there's very poor soil, there's very poor quality of, I mean, no access to roads, no access to anything. And this is where people were generally located. Then most of these people then would contract their labor to. So this is where my grandfather's story comes sort of around this time. So my grandfather was a very successful farmer. So part of what the colonial government did was to say, if you're a good farmer, then you get a big piece of land. It's not necessarily a very a good farming area. You know, so this is what like really came to me later on that okay, my grandfather had a big farm, but if it was properly organized, my grandfather's farm must have been 3 times the size it was. It had to do more size because the area where it was located was supposed to be ranch. And generally with ranching, you need more land. You need a lot of land. So this was actually later on. Yes, I mean, I might have had this impression that my grandfather had 3 farms, but it wasn't that big. You know, so he was one of those like master farmers. And that's how he got moved to Zimbabwe. With no access to roads, no electricity, you know, not much water. Let's move on. So I just thought I should put that up. So this is like from what happened was that after 1890, after 5 years, it was like an uprising in Zimbabwe. Basically arrested, they got hanged. You see, so these people now, you see, they continue, like, when I get into the later part of the presentation, these 2 people, like, their names continue to be invoked. They become like this ancestral, you know, sort of like inspiration for ongoing uprisings in Zimbabwe against, you know, whatever, you know, colonialism, imperialism, neo-imperialism. They've been actually owned by the political system, so to speak. But so let's talk about what happened then around 1965. Around 1965, what happened was that the government in Zimbabwe declared independence, almost like what which they declared as a declaration of independence in 1965. So they say they're not going to be associated with the British. And I think by then the country was already known as named after the key colonizer. I mean, Cicero Road is buried in Zimbabwe. So the country was known as so around this time, what happened was that they started to, like, liberation movement started to be made around that time. This liberation movement, after failure of negotiation, you know, compromise, they decided to go into resistance. Russia, China, Tanzania, Ghana. But this time, I think we're going ready. And then what happened was that the international economic sanctions, I guess, speaking the name of the president at that time. So the land question was a major cause of this during the war at this time. Because people started saying, we need land, you know, because the land had always been central to the people. They were land people. They were people that lived on land, you know, they raised cattle, they grew crops on land. The land meant belongs to them, you know. But anyway, just moving on, in 1979, there was a negotiation. So the way that Zimbabwe got liberated was through negotiation. It was, okay, the gun played a significant part, but eventually there was a negotiation between the liberation movement. April 1980, Mugabe won a landslide victory, and you know, in the first three elections, because the other elections that were taking place were bad. You're not allowed to vote, especially if you're very poor. So that's a picture of the election. So what I'm going to try and do, let's do this. Here with me. Let's not play this a little bit.
It's free. He says the company canteen serves a good...
Star Wars show. Welcome to the Star Wars show, Mr. Johnny Fire.
This is about before you can.
A comedian from Britain, Charlie Williams, entertains a white nightclub audience in Salisbury, Rhodesia.
Now this is a wonderful thing. I like it, and I hope you like it. And as is followed through in a lot, I'm telling
A black Briton trading racial jokes with white Rhodesians. For people who mightn't want a black at their table, it's a nice irony. This, as the manager will tell you, is a multiracial club, except for Africans.
Is that in colour? I hope it is. It's in black or white or negative.
In Salisbury Cecil Square, black bandsmen play for the whites as they celebrate their occupation of Rhodesia at the annual Pioneer Day ceremony.
Yes,
It's 85 years since Europeans colonised this black African territory they called Rhodesia after their imperialist patron, Cecil Rhodes. Today, a tiny white population, about the size of Newcastle, governs 6 million Africans. They no more share power now than they did at the turn of the century. Most whites came to Rhodesia only recently, but they hastened to adopt the simple colonialist values of the pioneer men of the land, who still dominate Rhodesian politics. are the men and the women who've lived the entire course of Rhodesia's short history, the last survivors of the original pioneers.
Okay, so trying to give you this like Stephen.
You're not up 100% fiber optics.
And then
I talked to Robert about his position as leader of this most active group of guerrillas, about his ideas for the new Zimbabwe, and the chances of it coming about from this British-run conference.
this is the old video.
What kind of society do you want to see established in Zimbabwe after?
I would like to see a society based on the principle of non-racism. In other words, the present system whereby land is divided according to race, the economy is worked according to race, society as a whole is established on the principle of racial blocks. This I would like to see.
You want to see a fully socialized society?
Oh, yes, surely. We are dedicated to socialism. This we can say it. This every African delegation can say, and we will have a socialist state.
Would the blacks, for instance, go on owning small farms and businesses?
Well, one has got to allow here for a measure of adaptation of socialist principles. You cannot start off by taking control of everything of any individual enterprise. You got to make some allowance for the start for enterprise.
Looking ahead, do you believe that Rhodesian majority rule involves free elections?
Yes, of course, why not? We are fighting for democracy. We would like to see a democratic state established. And this means a state based on the wishes of the majority of people. The best way in which people can demonstrate their participation in democracy is by voting and elections of right necessity.
Do you suppose that Ian Smith and the whites represented at this conference are going to accept black control of the army and the police during the interim stage?
If they accept the fact of the transfer of power, I don't see why we shouldn't accept the fact that this power must be as effective as any law can be in a state. And this effectiveness can only come from the fact of control by officers.
Do you believe that the whites in Rhodesia will accept?
Whether they will accept it or not is immaterial to us, really. They have to accept it in as much as they must accept the political domination.
Surely it is material to you in the sense that if they don't accept it, the strength breaks down.
Well, if they do,
So I hope you guys do this.
Yeah, go ahead.
Policies keeping Africans in their place, which by 1965 made Rhodesia illegal in the eyes of the world. I don't believe in black majority rule forever. And what is the cause of this?
So I mean, like that's just the song in the background is Bob Marley's song. So, I like that song. And capitulate the whole thing. So these guys are just talking about the decision, how Bob Marley decided to come to Zimbabwe. That's just an aside.
Zimbabwe. You have dignitaries from all over the world.
Pakistan is actually represented. I think that's so that's sort of like when the independence thing took place in 1980. And that's the Union Jack coming down.
As Prince Charles gathers songs and visiting heads of government and VIPs from around the world watch, the new flag was raised, Robert Mugabe's government assumed power, and Zimbabwe reborn.
And that's Bob Marley playing on the
Zimbabwe?
Yeah, he's playing in Zimbabwe on the night of
What year is this?
1980. Okay, so so basically, okay, so I was just trying to give you an impression of like what was happening around the independence time. So there's a lot of euphoria in Zimbabwe, like moving away from a white minority rule to sort of democratic, all-encompassing rule. Because one of the things that Mugabe did at independence was to say we're not going to revenge for all the things that had happened in the past. You know, and I think it goes back to that idea of how do you, I think it goes back to that idea of like how do you start like reshaping society without speaking more black. I think that's what happened in independence. So almost, I think Mandela actually took the lead from that because Mugabe actually put it into practice in 1980, and he was almost nominated for the Nobel Prize at that time, and he was knighted by the England, and he got all sorts of other awards around the world. So basically, what happened was the land stayed in the hands of the farmers, white farmers at that time. And then what was put into place was that if you wanted to buy land, you were a willing buyer, on a willing buyer, willing seller basis. And as we all know, most of us just want to hold on to land. Like I was saying, like let's reflect on land because land is so important. That time, everyone wants to hold on to their piece of land. The idea of willing buyer, willing seller did not actually work. So 10 years into independence, like that's when I was born around that area. Those are the days that I'm talking about. When we moved onto this farm in Aussie, where like we're basically like surrounded. This was a commercial farming area in Thailand. So essentially just surrounded by white farmers. Although to me at that time, like strike me as strength. And so in 1997, something started happening. So and you have to see this in the global sense of the political situation in Zimbabwe, because we had come out of this euphoric sort of independent period, and what was happening now was some things were starting to, turn bad. There were a lot of like social investment immediately after the 1980s, but that meant like eating into the budget of the country. Like in 1990, remember also that the economic structure adjustment programs were coming up in many of these countries. The economic structure adjustment program started causing a lot of social upheaval. The land problem remained in the collective consciousness. It was always going to become a political reform as a result, because it did not be addressed. And so some of the statistics when Zimbabwe gained independence was 6.5% of the country's arable land. In that part of the country that I showed you was owned by around 6,000 commercial farmers who make up less than 1% of the population. So they basically own almost 70%. The rest coming back. Well, that's probably that again. So these are some of the pictures that started coming out of Zimbabwe around 2000. So as you can see, there was a deliberate process to start moving onto these white-owned farms, which is engineered by the government, the President Robert Mugabe's government at that time. So as you can see, like this is a picture of farmer, those guys decided to play the farms, like very quite scary. And that's also the thing that is quite scary. And so this scene's played out, across the whole country. And often what would happen is that the white women would take it right away, and then was a lot of negatives at the time, as we get in there, alcohol, whatever, some of the pieces that started coming out. So some of the pieces are not, they're very horrific. So what the situation today? Basically, like after these white farmers moved away, because they had developed a very sophisticated agricultural system, no doubt, it's comparable to any in the world. They started moving out, and agricultural production sort of went down, and it was so, most of the farmers left. Then the new law was put into the Constitution, which said that the government should take over the land, pay the land, let the land so that it was place. The problem though was that some people had taken the land. Some of this farmers remember that this arrangement with Robert is saying which is I think so some people say that it's the biggest land form in Africa today. Like 6,000 then it's evidence that by 245,000 farmers, primarily it's for fortunately poor people who, according to got this court, because you have to understand that even though I'm saying that the agricultural system that was there was sophisticated, it has taken quite a long time to get. So this is according to the position and agricultural production is not going up. So I think
Alright! Yeah! Zimbabwe! Alright! Viva freedom, yeah, Zimbabwe! Viva freedom, yeah, Zimbabwe! Yes! Viva Africa! Viva! Viva Africa! Viva! Alright. How good and how pleasant it is for a nice place again in one project.
I don't know. Finish my presentation on this one.
Alright. Who live in the rain today and I continually, ever faithful, ever sure. Jah Rastafari! Jah Rastafari! Jah Rastafari! Everyone got the right to decide. Oh, yes,
right to decide his own destiny, and this judgment is no partiality. I think, like in Zimbabwe, I mean, the issue of race, politics, economy is really like playing a significant role to that land issue. And the problem is now the biggest problem is we don't know who really it seems that it's still like a lot of work to understand who we reflecting on my grandfather, one of the problems that I see is that in part of the country where he was located, he must have employed, he needed to have employed other cultural techniques in that area. For example, raising corn. He would have raised corn and become a very big farming in that area. The problem is not about the corn. Everyone is using corn, and corn doesn't grow everywhere. Irrigation in the country before the land disruption was quite significant, has been disrupted. So irrigation is about the problem. So there is a lot of problems around that. I mean, there's a lot of problems around that system, which needs to work out to make it. So I think with that, thank you for hearing it. I just took me through 100 years of this. Yeah, but I mean, that's it. You know, there's a lot that I can talk about. You know, part of the whole thing about land is political. There's no doubt. You know, it was always this problem that was over the time. And now it still continues to be a problem. So that's it. Yeah.
What's the percentage of native Zimbabweans?
So I mean, it's one of the things at the moment is that, like in the communal areas, it is not. So the question is what percentage of Zimbabweans on land? You know, it's a very difficult question to answer because in the communal areas there is no land ownership. And after this land reform program, most people don't have title deed to the land, which means they can't go back. That system is not going to do other than go to the bank and get the capital. So I cannot give you a number, but the number that I put up there after the land reform program is about 275,000.
Are they still in white farmers left now?
Yes, I mean, they are still white farmers that are left in Zimbabwe. There's even more that are coming back. Because, you know, in terms of the quality of the soil, land itself is like one of the best farming areas. Like in the world, we were one of the biggest producers in the world prior to 2000. We did it back then. So I think there's some farmers they are some. What is? Oh, okay, all right. I mean, I think we've got a very small population. I think people need to get back most about it. I mean, I think it's like 11 million, 12 million people, and the land is 390.
That's more people. 11 million total? 11 million total?
Yeah.
I mean, I
We have 20 million. We are only in
no, that's. I wonder if you have in sport a lot of agriculture. Like you have like you have some numbers about the production.
So I'll say that. I mean, I think that's a good question, but I don't have the figures at the moment. But what I can just say to you is that we're like one of the leading tobacco producers in the world.
But if you produce more now than before?
Well, I mean, we still produce quite a lot of tobacco at the moment, but the figure sort of dropped and they're going back up again. But you know, like most to this land, like one of the crops that they grow is tobacco. And for me, that's actually a problem because, like, they're growing tobacco. What do you do with tobacco? First of all, tobacco kills the soil. Secondly, it kills your life. But thirdly, you know, it's mainly mainly for export, right? I mean, but they're getting a lot of money. So we're going back anyway to those. Zimbabwe was actually the bread basket for Southern Africa. They called it the bread basket. In the sense that we're producing surplus food, which you know was feeding a bunch of money. But now they say it became the basket of Africa.
Will you receive some kind of subsidy from the government if you own a land and receive some subsidy?
So the government has tried to support farmers, but you know, till the law. During this period,
I'm talking about 2001.
Oh, okay.
Okay, she said she and her family were kind of refugees because their land was in the white man, so they had to settle. Now these are their senators. Yeah, so it's like, you know what, people have to come back once they're obsession.
Yeah, you know, I mean, look, there's still a lot of legal issues around that. You know, like some people, you know, like took the case, then disposition to court. I mean, I think, you know, there's going to continue to be legal questions around the land first. But that has not been acted. So, big, but just to say that I thought you were referring to land that was taken away from you. You know, there's not enough record. But the legal issue.
What was the next question? So how is socialism influenced?
So first of all, like I told you, we had the policy of reconciliation. Say, that was the philosophy. One of the things in terms of the socialist programs, we had the 5-year program. Remember that previous station things all the time. That this is the year of development. You know, like from 1985 so we tried to push all this socialist program, but you know, we corruption and they adopted So that's something that I should not get into. But in terms of governance policy, I think you start looking history of Zimbabwe, there's a lot of confusion.